This episode is brought to you by HP Plus. In a world full of smart devices, isn't it about time your printer got smart too? Now printing is smart with HP Plus, and the HP Smart app is how it all happens. You can print from your phone with just a tap, no matter where you are, even from your garage/home office/yoga studio. Huh, that is smart. HP Plus. Learn more about smart printing at hp.com/smart.
Mahomes has the time, delivers perfectly downfield, touchdown! Patrick Mahomes with a rope.
This one, Adams, touchdown! This time going deep for Beckham Jr. Did he catch it? He did!
Hello everyone, welcome back to RotoViz Overtime on RotoViz Radio. My name is Colin Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Overtime Ireland. It is a bonus edition of RotoViz Overtime as we are live on the clock in the FFPC main event draft. It is the high stakes version. It is a $1,900 buy-in. It is a lot of fun as we go through this draft. It's fast paced and it's high action as we try and make those decisions while on the clock. We've enjoyed bringing you these drafts over the last month or so. It's been a lot of fun to split them up. Lots of positive feedback. So hopefully you have enjoyed them. If you have enjoyed them, drop us a written review on your favorite podcast app. That is much appreciated. Make sure you're subscribed to the RotoViz Overtime podcast feed to get all those shows once they come out. Usually they are up there a little bit earlier, maybe 8 to 12 hours ahead of the main feed. So get them once you have that opportunity to listen in. Get in on the action. But Sean, we are at the kind of nearly at the halfway point of this 20-round draft. It's going pretty interesting so far. We've got ourselves a couple more running backs that people might be expecting. We've got ourselves some nice wide receivers and tight ends as well. But we will march forward. But things are going pretty well so far. Hopefully they continue that way.
I think so. This has been a fun draft to this point. We've made some unusual decisions. We have too many running backs, but we needed to extend one of these after the extreme zero RB build the other day. Got a lot of pushback from the receivers in that one. This time I feel like we'll get pushback from our fans, which is always good too, right? So when people are asking us why we got the running backs, we'll have to come up with a good answer for that. In the listener leagues, the answer has been these guys are 4 or 5 rounds below ADP and the wide receivers are wiped out. Colin, when we do the wrap up, we'll discuss why we made some of these picks. But at this point, let's see how we go the rest of the way. We've got 12 more picks we need to execute with the lack of wide receivers currently on our roster.
So Sean, we are in the 9th round. We are on the clock. Things are playing out quite well for us so far. We do have a core of 3 running backs, 4 wide receivers, 1 tight end. Some options that are available for us here at this point. We did talk about DJ Chark previously. Chark is still on the board. He's probably somebody who's going to be in contention there. We've talked about Will Fuller previously. Rondell Moore is somebody we like. Mike Gesicki is also in play. So I think we're looking at those wide receivers, and I know we really do love Rondell Moore and what we expect from him this season. I think, though, after talking through the scenario with DJ Chark, if he is there at this point, I think it's another one of those where if he's lasted that full range of picks to get back to us, I think that would probably be the selection. But we did talk about Will Fuller. We haven't yet talked about Rondell Moore. How much are we willing to stretch to get Rondell Moore? You've mentioned that this week in the drafts over the past couple of days for the main event that he has been going a little bit higher. And as I mentioned, that DJ Chark is off the board. So Rondell Moore might now become a consideration.
Yeah, he's been going early in round 11. And so if we pass on him in the sort of 9-10 area, he's a little bit more unlikely to come back than we might like. Although once you get into the double-digit rounds, you expect to see people bigger reaches, bigger falls. And so definitely not out of the equation entirely. Colin, we're kind of coming back to the situation now where a Ronald Jones and Tony Pollard will potentially be there for us. And as we mentioned, we could get some exposure to that Thursday night game with those guys. We're a little bit overweight now at running back with the A.J. Dillon selection, but with DJ Chark and Will Fuller being selected, I think that wide receiver has suddenly dried up for us.
I know we talked about it on the first portion of the show as the draft continues here, but tight end was somewhere where we talked about would we wait. Gesicki is one of those guys that I really do like, so he would be there as well. But I think the way the draft's playing out here, the value is at the running back position. And And for me, I think the exposure to that game on Thursday Night Football and getting Ronald Jones in there, who I still think has a huge breakout in him, I would be leaning towards Jones. Have you a different preference at the running back position? The only other option for that game really is Pollard, who goes later, and Bernard, who goes later, but is consistently climbing up draft boards as we're back on the clock.
Yeah, I mean, it might make sense to wait on a Bernard to see if he's there for us in round 11. Gesicki, the other maybe interesting choice here. This is about his range, and with Fuller not being someone who's going to be on the roster, we get exposure to that Dolphins team that way. I think that tight end is probably a more important position for us right now than running back. And the likelihood that we have at least one of those two guys in terms of Jones and Pollard in round 10 would kind of make me lean toward the tight end here.
Let's go. I was pumping the tight ends earlier. I didn't think that we could turn things around. Where I was waiting to hold out for Komet. The concern and the reason I like to get somebody like Gesicki there is now that we have Fant and Gesicki, we have, two. We can still plug in two if we do need to do that. We have the upside of the two young guys potentially breaking out, and we also don't have to go and really push it out for the likes of a Komet. And Komet is the guy we're targeting there. I know you mentioned Fairmouth, but I do think we're going to see a situation where Gesicki is ready to step in from the very start. How close, just out of interest, have you Gesicki to Komet?
They're in different tiers, but Komet's someone we don't really have any idea about. He could be a guy who takes that big step forward. I like him in the same way that last year we liked TJ Hawkinson, we liked Noah Fant. Hawkinson and Fant didn't actually make the step to the range where they would help you compete with those top tight ends. Hopefully this season they will. I think Komet gets into that range where he outperforms the tight ends taken in the 4 or 5 tight end slots ahead of him. It may still be another season before he can get to that elite level. The Bears are still doing some squirrely things overall. Obviously, they have generated some enthusiasm with the Justin Fields selection and then how well he's played. And yet Nagy has gotten a lot of criticism for how he's handled so many things over this preseason and, several years that have just transpired. And so we want to be a little bit careful as well in terms of how we approach that tight end and just how much expectation we have. I mean, he's someone who it makes sense to add into a lot of builds late, not necessarily someone that you want to look at and say, well, this guy solves all of our tight end problems.
Yeah, no, I agree. And when I would be usually building my teams out, I do have, I won't say quite a few, but I have teams with Gesicki. I have a lot of dynasty rosters specifically with Gesicki, but in terms of season-long or best ball, in this range, it tends to be I've gone with the wide receivers and the tight ends early, and then at that particular point, I'm trying to hit, James Conner, Ronald Jones, AJ Dillon, Tony Pollard. But when we have the build there, I really like going the tight end at that particular point. So we are on the turn next. We're 2 picks away. We're at the 10:04 is our selection. So we have touched on Rondell Moore. He would be the wide receiver target. We would be taking him ahead of ADP, but he probably isn't going to come back to us at that point. We do still have the options of Ronald Jones there, Zach Moss there. Are we going to lean in and take the likes of Moss or Jones? Or are we going to take the jump and go for Rondell Moore, sorry?
Well, I think that ideally, we take these guys when we're in position within our drafts to do that. And so, with having both Moss and Jones here, unless they go on these consecutive next 2 picks, which is always possible, then I think we have to do it. And I think that, Jones is maybe the guy who, again, with that Thursday night game, if he goes out and he gets 2 touchdowns, then it makes it very clear in terms of, what you can accomplish by plugging him into the starting lineup, winning in week 1.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think at the moment there's 1 pick to go. Jamal Williams has come off the board. That leaves us with either Moss or Jones. So with the Thursday night football game, that would give the tiebreaker to Ronald Jones. If we weren't talking Thursday night football, we were just in a normal format. Are you taking Jones over Moss, or are you taking Moss over Jones? I know we've started to draft more Devin Singletary recently, but of those two guys, who's the option for you? And we do have our pick here, but I think the Thursday Night Football is going to make that selection for us.
Yeah, it is. I have them very close. I think that Moss has a slight edge because the potential is there for him to fall into a ton of high-value touches. It's a little bit more difficult to see that with Jones. There's a chance that Fournette might be the guy around the goal line. We're very confident that Bernard will be the guy to have the receptions, but Jones is the huge talent in that backfield. And so that's something we also want to bet on. It turns out that we didn't have the option of Rondale Moore because he did go ahead of us. So that's about a round ahead of ADP. Again, once you get into these double-digit rounds, you're going to have that kind of thing happen. You can't count on the guy being exactly in the spot. But Colin, we're on the clock. Moss, Jones, both available. It sounds like Ronald Jones is the direction.
Yeah, that's the way I would like to go. It gives you that advantage too. I know we like Bernard. We could wait and take him, but the way things will play out, he may not be there. Sean, you mentioned at the start to have more exposure to the running back position than we did in our previous one, but yeah, this is working out quite nicely for us. We've got two of our favorite targets we've been hitting all season, in Jones and Dillon, and then we have Sermon, who you obviously have talked about in the zero RB piece, and then we have DeAndre Swift, which puts us in a really nice position there. We've got our 4 wide receivers. So I think that it's going to be interesting. Sean, I'm just getting your thoughts on Ronald Jones going off the board at the 10:02. Real increase in ADP over the preseason period. Is that a point now where we wouldn't be making that reach? I've been kind of hoping to get him in the 11th, 12th, and most of those drafts over the last month, but I think we're starting to get into a really high spot.
I wouldn't necessarily say that. I mean, he's probably fairly valued in round 10. And so if you feel like you want to have him, need to have him, and you're not confident he's going to come back, I would take him in that range. I think he's going to score a ton of points. DeAndre Hopkins' presence will leave him a lot of great coverage situations. They're going to have manufactured touches for him. Perhaps DeAndre Hopkins misses a bunch of games with COVID exposures, and then you have the wide receiver 1 target situation. And so with all that being the case, no, I don't think that he's overvalued in that range. It's always unfortunate when the guys who were great values start to rise up the board. I think you can still select him there. Colin, now I think that we have to hope that Henry Ruggs comes back to us because we're going to be very thin at wide receiver. Yeah,
it's going to be interesting to see what plays out here. I would expect him to be there though, unless there's another pick here from somebody who's been listening to our shows over the last couple of weeks. There's probably other people talking about Ruggs as well, but I think we've probably talked more positively about him over the last month than most spots after how things played out last season. But it is going to be a situation here where we're a little bit bare if he does go off the board at that particular point. We'll see how it plays out, but if it's a case that might be that pivot point to a quarterback if Ruggs is gone. Is that how you're feeling at the moment?
I think so. I think that's the direction we go. If ADP suggests that if Ruggs isn't there, that we'd be able to go with Justin Fields and then Joe Burrow. I really like that combination. I know it creates a lot of risk for week 1 with the dearth of real quality options to pick in round 17, 18, 19. I'd be fine with adding Ryan Fitzpatrick for a third quarterback to have that week 1 coverage, knowing that we'll obviously move out of those guys as the season goes along. Sometimes it's actually better to have a little bit of an open spot on your roster, because if you have someone that you really like that you drafted in round 18, round 19, and they don't do a lot in week 1, but you still believe in them, and there are 2 or 3 options that are just no-brainer waiver adds, and you bid a little bit low as a result, and then you don't get them, you hold your guy, you've got that roster clogger for multiple weeks. Now, I'm not saying that that's obviously the way that it would always work out. Sometimes that guy you really loved comes out and you cut him, and then the week after he blows up, and then you've got to spend half your budget to get him back. And so, we can't tell the future, but there are some different things that we can do as we look through how this draft would go. I think we still don't know what Fields is going to be. I think we still don't know what Burrow's going to be with the addition of Chase. And so the possibilities there are pretty intriguing, I think that you can't count on just one of them. Now, Fields actually goes with Tom Brady at the 10-11 turn to the Christian McCaffrey drafter. So another kind of interesting thing that he's done there. Lance is still available. I mean, he's just so trendy. I would be surprised if he makes it back to our pick. Most of the players we've really been targeting in the odd rounds have gone, 3 or 4 picks ahead of us. Again, that's not necessarily a huge surprise. You would expect other people to also be on those guys. You wouldn't necessarily expect to get values on the players who have a lot of momentum right now, but it has been a little bit disappointing. At the same time, the team that we've drafted looks really good to me. And now the key to these last 10 rounds is to make sure we're doing the necessary things to give ourselves some upside, not being overconfident in these picks, but continuing to add players who could potentially help us. Now, we've got Ruggs. Hamler's someone we try and draft everywhere. He's not been going that early the last couple of days, so we don't know for sure just how early we need to reach for him. If we don't reach and he goes, we'll be pretty disappointed. If we do reach, then you're giving up that chance to actually have a good player in the last couple of rounds. Column Jalen Reagor, another second-year sort of post-hype or bounce-back player in the same vein as Ruggs, has been going in round 14. Even after practicing extremely well, there is some concern he might not even be the number 2 receiver with how well Quez Watkins is playing. Watkins, fantastic profile coming into the NFL. Sort of weird that he fell as far as he did in the NFL draft. And then you have the situation where he plays behind Hightower as a rookie, and yet he's now emerged and is doing kind of what we expected. The Smith, Reagor, Watkins 3 wide receiver set for the Eagles is more dynamic than I think a lot of people were anticipating. Is Reagor one of these guys where being a little bit light at wide receiver, now he's someone we're definitely hoping falls.
Hey, RotoViz radio listener, this is Curtis Patrick from the Dynasty Command Center podcast, and I've got a special deal for you today. Go to rotoviz.com, click the subscribe button, put the 12-month subscription in your cart, and use promo code RVRadio2021. That's RVRadio2021, and you're going to save 10%. Taking advantage of this deal, getting your hands on what's included in the package is the best way to enhance your performance this year. So go to rotoviz.com and subscribe now.
Do you ever feel like you're being followed around the internet? Maybe advertisers know a little bit too much about you? Our new sponsor, IPVanish VPN, is here to help you take back your privacy and help become anonymous on the internet. So what is IPVanish? It's a virtual private network, a VPN for short, and a VPN is an important tool that helps you safely browse the internet. You can use a VPN on your computers, tablets, phones, even things like your Fire Stick when you're streaming media. When you use a VPN, all your data is encrypted, what you're reading, what you're searching, what you're watching, whatever it is you're doing. And that's important because what you're doing on the internet is no one's business but yours. For listeners of the show, IPVanish is offering an incredible 65% off their annual plan, equal to 6 free months. IPVanish is super easy to use. You turn it on with a click of a button and it runs seamlessly in the background, helping to protect you while you're browsing the web. And if you run into a problem, no worries. IPVanish has a 24/7 support available. So head on over to ipvanish.com/rotoviz to claim your 65% savings. Their annual plan is just $44.99. IPVanish is the best of the best, even rated 4.7 out of 5 on Trustpilot, and that's with more than 6,000 reviews. Remember, it's ipvanish.com/rotoviz to get the deal and start protecting yourself online.
Does this sound familiar? You've got one device that lets you catch the game live, another that lets you stream your favorite shows, you're watching sports highlights on your phone, and you've got your neighbor's best friend's login for the good stuff. Well, I want to tell you about a simple way to get all that entertainment you love without the hassle, and a great way to finally get your TV together. It's called DirecTV Stream, and it brings you live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before, so you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes and no need to buy another device ever again. And the best part? There's no annual contract. So So get rid of the clutter and the confusion and get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Compatible device required. Content varies by package.
Yeah, I think so. And I think something that's happened, I mentioned with Thomas, I think sometimes the narrative that comes out can skew the ADP quite a bit as well. And we're seeing a situation where the hype is coming out for Watkins. I think obviously Rager didn't have best, rookie season. So I think people probably a little bit down on him, and people do like to jump for that new shiny toy. So I still think there's, heading into that second year, a lot to be offered by Rager. I think the offense is going to be much better this year than it was last year. So I do think that he's interesting. The thing obviously with them then is the week 14 bye for this particular format will be in the final week of the playoffs. At the moment, we only have one guy that would fall into that. That would be Gesicki. And obviously we would have time as well throughout the season to maybe manipulate the team through the waiver wire as well if we did get to that point and had to look ahead to the playoffs if things were going well. But it's just something probably to take into consideration. But at the moment, Sean, we do have a situation where we're 2 picks away. Ruggs is there. Ruggs, for me, the clear option here if he lasts those 2 more picks.
Yeah, it's interesting that the quarterbacks have been very inexpensive in this draft. Matthew Stafford still available. I know a lot of people are excited about what he could do with the Rams. Jalen Hurts, the quarterback there for the Eagles, still available. Really a huge no-brainer at this point, even with the championship week bye in 14. Trey Lance is still available, and not surprisingly, Joe Burrow is still available. So maybe a little bit more pressure to consider a quarterback at this point. Colin, with those guys there, one of the things is you can have a value, the value can go 1 pick ahead of you, but then also if you have got another position that you have to address, then the value isn't going to last through another 24 picks. If you pass on them in a range, like if we pass on them in the 11, 12, it's not going to come back in round 13. And so we really have some difficult choices in terms of what to do at QB when we're on the clock for these next couple picks.
Yeah, so we are on the clock. The QB is interesting. You mentioned Trey Lance, I think would be somebody I'd be interested in here. I think there's the option to pair him up, but the way quarterback is played out in this, I think we could go with one quarterback at the next turn. So if we look at not at the next turn, at the next pick, if we look at our wide receivers after this point, Sean, for me, there is a drop off from Ruggs. We mentioned Rager, but I still would have Ruggs quite a bit ahead of Rager. My thought would be here to take Ruggs and then to take quarterback then in the following round.
Okay, so
was that kind of what you were thinking, or?
Yeah, well, I was thinking that we could potentially take 2. The pick here that has kind of caused us some perhaps mildly negative trickle-down effects has now been the A.J. Dillon pick. If we had a wide receiver in that pick, then we would be all set to take these quarterback values, really get 2 of them. But where we were at QB, or where we were at wide receiver, we definitely needed to get another one there. There's a lot of buzz around Bryan Edwards. It may not be even Henry Ruggs who ends up being the guy in Las Vegas, but another sort of peripheral nice benefit of the way this is setting up for us. We're weaker at wide receiver, and yet the buys line up 6, 7, 8, 9, 12. We don't have any double buys at this point. And so with that being the case, I think that what's happened here at wide receiver now kind of sets us up to have a chance to take some of these late guys that we really enjoy. That part of it will be fun. And the QBs continue to fall. So there are 4 picks ahead of us. Stafford, Hurts, Lance, Burrow, also on the board. Colin, I think we're going to get a good player in round 12.
Yeah, and part of my process for going Ruggs was obviously the positional scarcity, I guess, in that tier, but we also have the teams after us in Team 10, Team 11, Team 12 all have one quarterback, Aaron Rodgers, Kyler Murray, and Dak Prescott. So there's a chance that one of them will go and look at there's a chance that they all decide to take quarterbacks here after I've mentioned that, but I thought that would help push those guys down to us. So hopefully we'll have our option. For me, at this point, Sean, we're going to talk about later on in the draft getting one of those quarterbacks that we like, maybe even the Fitzpatrick that you mentioned. For me, if Lance is there, I would really be shooting for that upside with him. Is he your selection, or are we looking at Stafford, Hurts, or Tannehill over him?
I think that Lance. I mean, it's just the fun one. You kind of have to go.
Just me, yeah.
I think. But I mean, Hurts at this point is kind of silly, right? I mean, he's getting knocked down because I think, at least in part, that bye. But I mean, he's around 10 value. And
he's fallen in so many leagues that I've drafted him in the 12th round a couple of times over the last 2 or 3 weeks. It's just people have just decided to go off. But obviously the news breaking today, Gardner Minshew traded to the Eagles, but I'm not overly concerned about that either. But I think that if you get a veteran quarterback later, having Trey Lance gives you that freedom then for whether he starts week 1 or whether it's week 4 or week 5. I still think that, and it could be week 7, week 6 by a week, might take him in after that. But so for you, it's between Hurts and Lance. I would still lean towards Lance, but I'm open to the Hurts pick as well.
Yeah, I mean, Hurts is going to score more points because he's going to start the season. And I think that, the Gardner Minshew trade is about their backup situation. It would be pretty dark for Jalen Hurts if he's actually got to contend with Gardner Minshew. I like Minshew. I think that they didn't give him the right situation there in Jacksonville. I mean, he came out so hot as a rookie, and yet, I mean, come on. I mean, Hurts gives you a much better chance to win. He's going to be the guy there. I mean, who knows? At this point, maybe he falls all the way back through, but more likely someone like Burrow might fall all the way back through. Trey Lance did fall to us. We are going to make that pick. It gives us some sexiness to this particular draft, but we always want to come out with some of that. And so now we're kind of looking at it and thinking, okay, well, we've got a guy who's going to average 37 points a game once he becomes the full-time starter. And then, like with Michael Vick when he came back from all of his misadventures, we have a player who will be unstoppable, and we were able to select him in round 12.
Yeah, no, I think quarterbacks have, Stafford goes off the board next. Quarterbacks have gone quite a bit later than I would have expected here, but I think Trey Lance there's a really, really nice pickup. And there is lots of options later. We're seeing lots of drafts where some of the guys aren't going off the board, like Big Ben or Derek Carr, and they're not. You talked about sexy picks. They're not sexy picks, but they're picks that if we don't have a quarterback come week 1, there's still options on the waiver wire and things like that. But I think that Lance there is a lot of fun, and getting him and getting Ruggs as well, I think puts us in a better position from an overall build and a construction off the roster. We are going to wait a round and a half to get back to our next selection, Sean, but you mentioned now the flexibility we do have at this point. We can kind of to lean one way or the other. I think the ideal situation is one of those quarterbacks that you mentioned continues to fall down, and we get an option for them in that 13th round. If they aren't there, where are you looking at that point? And that is the range that we tend to see somebody like Cole Kmet going. We have 2 tight ends. Do we still try and lean that way, or do we stick to our 2 tight end build at this point?
I think if you get down into round 13 and Kmet is still there, then you've got to really strongly consider it. He's someone who is going in round 13, but I mean that's below where he should be, right? I mean, he should be around 12 or around 11 pick. He goes in the first half of round 13. Obviously, we pick in the second half of round 13. Behind him, it gets pretty bleak. Now, Jarwin, interesting because of the Thursday night game. It is a situation where I think Dalton Schultz in the last round is interesting as a result of that as well. We talked about Pat Freiermuth. So there are some other guys, but having that third high upside tight end is something that you need to have as many bullets as possible when you're trying to figure out how you're going to manage some of these positions that are tricky. Now, to a certain extent, all the positions are tricky. And so we're looking for upside throughout with all of our picks, with the perhaps exception of if we had an extreme 0 RB build, maybe we'd be looking at a McKissick, a James White as we came back through here to make sure we had some of that receiving value. Blair Andrews, again, one of the just extraordinary wrong read articles coming out this week looking at advanced stats at the running back position. A lot of cool stuff on before contact yards, after contact yards, and the way that fits into creating a fantasy profile, but also this receiving element and how the receiving continues to be undervalued. And so you have some of those guys who can come in and bridge that gap. Colin, with what we've done at running back, I don't think there is as much necessity to do that. But at a certain point in the draft, then McKissic and White become no-brainers again, even with what we have earlier on. At the same time, with what we do have earlier on, players like a Chuba Hubbard, a Darrington Evans become easier guys to select because you don't have to play them in week one. So I like what we're kind of heading toward in round 13 here. A lot of the people I'm excited about are still available.
Yeah, no, it's going to give us a lot of flexibility. Usually when we're at this point, we're trying to hammer into those running backs that you just mentioned there, and, trying to get Hubbard, Evans, those sort of guys on your roster. But in this, we will have options. So that's going to be quite nice. I think overall it's a really beneficial construction. So we'll see how things play out. We have full 8 picks to go before we get to where we're picking. We are at the back end of round 12 at this point. We're seeing some of those running backs go off the board. We did just see Cole Kmet go off the board to the team with Christian McCaffrey in the 1 spot, pairs him up with Herb Smith as his tight ends. Have to say, Sean, that team 1 is doing quite a nice job. You mentioned a moment ago that he took Brady and Fields in back-to-back picks, picked up JD McKissic, Cole Kmet there. So things still not been thrown away by the team number 1. I'm giving up hoping that happening at this particular point. Zach Ertz goes off the board. So the more of these guys we see going off the board that we haven't talked about, obviously the more beneficial it is to us, but disappointing to see Kmet go off the board. We're still, I think, Sean, leaning towards quarterback. And for me, with the picks that remain between, there's 3 quarterbacks that we'll be kind of looking at here in Hurts, Tannehill, and Burrow. Still off the mindset that if one of those 3 are available, we take them here at this pick now that Kmet's gone.
I think so. At the same time, if we're getting to a point where we think that both of those guys, because they're both there, one of those guys will come back around. Ryan Tannehill sits in between them ADP wise. He's also there. We're not interested in him, but he could push down Joe Burrow 1 more spot. It is a situation where after Burrow, I think that the value craters from the perspective of, are you going to get that extremely elite season? Now, just earlier in the show, I mentioned that Mayfield, Fitzpatrick, Wilson do give you some of that upside, but I think that Burrow is one of these guys who could emerge with a Patrick Mahomes type of passing season. And so, it would be difficult to pass on him here for a wide receiver we're not even sure is going to be a clear-cut starter. At the same time, receiver is still the position that we're weakest at in terms of being able to build a team that hammers the bye weeks, that has the overall upside to win the entire tournament. Now, by sucking Jalen Reagor, you're not necessarily going to be putting yourself in a position to win the entire tournament. At the same time, you follow what he's been doing in practice. You look back at what his profile was coming into the NFL, and it looks more and more like that rookie season was partly a result of the injuries that he faced, which, when you're being constantly compared to Justin Jefferson and you're out there playing hurt, that's going to be a very difficult scenario. Also, it's within the context of Carson Wentz playing at a level that, would make Brady Quinn embarrassed. And so when you're looking at it from that perspective, I think that Reagor, someone who I still have a lot of enthusiasm for and think that he could be, maybe the bounce back guy that we're expecting Ruggs to be. He could be someone who comes out and scores a lot of points as teams focus on Devontae Smith.
Yeah, so unfortunately, Hurts just did not get back, nearly got there 13:05, 3 picks before us. But the good news is that you mentioned Tannehill. He was selected, pushed Burrow back to us. So we are on the clock with 47 seconds to pick. I think, Sean, for me, Burrow is the clear pick here, as you mentioned, with the tier break. And then I think the focus goes then to the wide receiver position.
Yeah, so let's select Burrow. Coming out of the draft with Lance and Burrow and having to pay 12th and 13th round prices, I think that's something that sort of redeems our running back heavy start to an extent, in that, we had some 0 RB targets in that range. He would have been a lot of fun. Chuba Hubbard did go in the couple of picks before us, and so he didn't make it back. If he had made it back and we were in a position to add him to just a 3 running back start or even a 2 running back start, that would have been kind of interesting. But to have it kind of match up with a draft where the QBs fell, now you're kind of thinking that, okay, we got Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson type of upside, especially if the guys do, if Burrow plays and is healthy, if Lance gets in there somewhat early, and then you can even start to mix and match against some of the matchup situations. Then, you're not streaming the quarterbacks, obviously, but just having 2 guys with really high upside, I think that can be underappreciated because you then can take the matchups that work for you. And so I'm very excited about having those QBs. Colin, it's about this time in the draft, it's important to kind of go through and look and see if, we're missing anything. We obviously have our queue filled with 20 plus players. We've got our tiers. We know what positions we have and what our buy situation is, which looks very, very good in terms of handling both the championship weeks, handling the overlap. This is really about the best buy situation that we've drafted all season. Manage that element of it. Anything that we're missing here as we head into round 14 pick?
I think we're missing some more wide receivers. That's probably about it at this point. I think quarterback's done at this point. I think it's done and dusted. Running backs, there is still going to be the options. I'm going to talk to you here in a second about a couple of options. I think that Rager is probably going to be our selection if we go wide receiver, but we do have the option of James White or Darrington Evans, who are quite interesting as running backs if we wanted to kind of seal that out. But we do have some running backs later that we really like, and we have wide receivers we like, but we're more selective in those wide receivers. So I think Rager is probably the one that I'd be pushing for here to add to that wide receiver room. Any concerns of Rager versus Watkins? I think, you mentioned it a few times, but I still think we're probably going to see Rager. And if it's not a clear wide receiver 2 situation, it's going to be a 1 or a 2A, 2B kind of thing. But any reason that you would take Watkins over Rager?
I don't think so. I think that Rager's draft situation and his prospect profile coming in, the explosiveness that he brings to the table, he's been making these Odell Beckham catches in practice. I think that we have to go that direction. Now, if Watkins lasts till the end of the draft, I think that he's someone who, especially since we're light at wide receiver, we're going to want to add on to there, because then you have a little bit of that optionality, right? If you're wrong on Rager, but suddenly right on Watkins, then you still get the payoff. I think that Watkins' upside is not going to be the same. If Rager really hits, then you're talking about someone who is a weekly starter. Watkins is probably more of a difficult weekly start, but setting it up that way does give you the situation to where you would have the guys to be able to potentially cover some buys and that kind of thing. And so Watkins, someone we're definitely going to be looking at. We did take Rager there. Now, Colin, it's a long wait until round 15, and frequent listeners probably know what I'm about to say, but I think the KJ Hamler watch starts now.
And what a cliffhanger to end this part off the draft on. We'll have to leave it there. Sean setting that up. That was not planned, but I think that was absolutely perfect. So we are through 14 of our selections. We will be back with the rest of the draft. I hope you are enjoying listening in. As always, we do thank you for checking out the show. If you are enjoying it, leave us a written review on your favorite podcast app. That does help us out a lot. We're getting close to the season. We're enjoying bringing you all these shows. And of course, if you want to get ready for the season with that RotoViz pass, all you have to do is add the code RVRadio2021 at checkout on rotoviz.com. Get yourself 10% off on the website of that NFL pass. Get yourself set up with all the tools, all the content. Sean has dropped his 0RB article this week, or 3 parts of it. There will be an update coming next week as well. Get that there and much, much more up on rotoviz.com, or go to rotoviz.com/podcast for additional information. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at @OverTimIreland. You can check out all of Sean's work, as I mentioned, up on rotoviz.com. Until we're back, just check if we can get KJ Hamler or not. Have a good one. Thank you for listening to Overtime on RotoViz Radio. Please rate and review the RotoViz Radio podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. You can contact us via email at rotovizradio@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter at RotoViz Radio. And remember, you can always support the pod by subscribing to RotoViz with a discount through the RotoViz Radio homepage, rotoviz.com/podcast.
This is NBA Storytime. I'm Jamel Johnson. Each week we tell tales of yore from the basketball floor. I'm talking the weird little stories from hoop history you didn't know, like how NBA jam cabinets are haunted by the ghost of a former net great, or what Rucker Park legend and globetrotter Jackie Jackson would do for a quarter. Then we bring in a basketball or comedy friend to talk about what we just learned in a post-game episode. Listen to NBA Storytime wherever you get your podcasts from Blue Wire.